Enveloped in layers of gold and silver gauze, draped in emeralds and pearls, her hands and feet dyed red, the Nautch girl from Kashmir was called String of Pearls. Later, Lady Maria Nugent, wife to the commander-in-chief of the East India Company's armies, would write how the dancer balanced a bottle of rose water on her head even as she crafted a bouquet from muslin. Keep the one you like best, the Emperor of Kashmir and Punjab, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, told a colonial envoy some 2 decades later. I have plenty more. All little girls who promise to turn out pretty are sold at the age of 8 years and conveyed into the Punjab and to India. The French botanist Victor Jacquemont wrote in 1832, using the same unsentimental prose he used to describe Kashmir's plant life. Their parents, he wrote, sell them at from 20 to 300 francs, most commonly 50 or 60. Last week, moral scolds in Kashmir erupted in outrage after a video surfaced of a medical student performing a Bollywood-inspired dance at a college in Anantnag. Letting students from outside Kashmir into the state, many suggested, was polluting the minds of its youth. One commentator demanded Kashmiris stop studying altogether and join jihadists instead. The streaming news channel Kashmir 24 was inundated with angry comments calling on viewers to turn their eyes away from the video to prayers and even lamenting the education of women. Kashmir is witnessing a drastic shift from Peerware to Shurware, or turning from a valley of saints to a valley of thieves, the channel editorially declaimed. Like all moral frenzies, this one often transgressed the thin line between cultural conservatism and ridiculousness. But there's a dangerous politics that underlies it and isn't much understood. Through the course of Kashmir's long jihad, Islamists have cast India as a predator, seducing the region's people with modernity. Kashmir's jihadists cast themselves as the protectors of its religion, its culture, and the bodies of its women. For India to genuinely weave Kashmir into its cultural fabric, it needs to engage with the traumatic impact colonialism had on the state, a trauma in which a Hindu state was deeply enmeshed. Long live Pakistan sang the hundreds of young men who, armed with axes and crowbars, had gathered to demolish Sabina Hamid Bullah's home in downtown Srinagar. Early in that summer of 2006, Srinagar residents had complained to police of pornographic clips circulating through mobile phones involving a teenage girl and various men. The girl gave an unsigned statement to police saying she was supplied with drugs and cash by Bullah for having sex with 2 state ministers, a top border security force officer, 10 policemen, an eminent lawyer, and several well-known businessmen. 4 men were eventually convicted to 10 years imprisonment for raping the teenager. The most high-profile accused, though, were acquitted after the girl resiled on key parts of her testimony. To Islamists, though, the issue wasn't the rape of a minor. The Indian state itself, they charged, was engaged in the destruction of Kashmiri womanhood. Elected to power in 2002, the People's Democratic Party Bharatiya Janata Party alliance had sought to build bridges with Islamists in Kashmir, hoping it would draw them away from secessionism. Things didn't go quite to plan. From 2005, the Islamist leader Asiya Andrabi and her all-women organization, the Dukhtaran-e-Millat, or Daughters of the Nation, began campaigning against what it described as a rising tide of, I quote, adultery, obscenity and debauchery. The organization's Maryam Squad vigilantes rounded on women on the street who were not wearing hijab and even set up an anti-adultery hotline. The campaign drew on the traumatic memory of the trafficking of Kashmiri women and the institutionalization of sex work during Dogra rule. The Dogras had self-consciously cast themselves as a Hindu state, the historian Chitralekha Zutshi has written, in an effort to build the legitimacy of their kingdom. Following a devastating famine in 1877-1878, the historian Shazia Malik has recorded, large numbers of families began selling their daughters into sexual servitude. The Maharaja cashed in on this, legalizing prostitution and issuing licenses from which the monarchy is estimated to have earned up to 25% of its revenues. In 1880, there were 18,715 registered sex workers in Kashmir, graded unbelievably today by income. Class 1 prostitutes paid an annual fee of 40 rupees, while Class 3 prostitutes were charged just 10. From the 19th century, the Dogra state's treatment of its subject empowered British voices seeking the annexation of Kashmir. The relationship of the Dogra state with sex work was among their most important lines of attack. The military officer Robert Thorpe reported that the kidnapping of women to keep as concubines had state sanction. The Christian missionary and anti-Catholic polemicist Arthur Brinkman joined the assault. Little dispute exists that these accounts of large-scale trafficking from Kashmir misrepresented reality more than a little. From census data it published in 1921, it is clear just a small part of Bombay's sex workers, for example, just 42 of 2,995, came from Kashmir. The women who served as Notch girls, contemporary accounts and modern historians like Pran Neville show, also came from Bengal and Tamil Nadu as well as all other parts of India. In colonial India, wherever it was, the millstones of poverty and patriarchy ground with very little regard for faith or ethnicity. The end of legalized sex work in Kashmir was brought about during the flowering of its nationalist movement. Led by the Srinagar barber Muhammad Subhan Hajam, anti-prostitution reformers wrote pamphlets and proselytized sex workers themselves to give up the business. Finally, the state's legislative assembly outlawed sex work in 1931. Kashmir's nationalists, fighting for freedom, had also begun building what they thought was a new moral society. Lawyers for the accused in the sex trafficking case many decades later would argue that the victim was a sex worker whose family had been engaged in the business since 1954. It even transpired that rules enabling the registration of sex work had never been formally revoked. The fraught terrain of identity and sex hovered over Kashmir like an ugly ghost. From the outset of the jihad in Kashmir, Islamists sought to appropriate heritage. Film theatres were bombed, beauty salons shut down, women in public life, like the television actress Shamima Parveen, were tortured and even executed. In 2001, as the violence escalated again, the Duktarane Millat began its first campaign to force Kashmir's women to cover up. Andrabi cast her struggle as part of a tradition that emerged from Hajam himself, though she glossed over his close relationship with Hindu and Sikh social reformers. This was part of a long struggle, the scholar Yoginder Sikand has written. Through the 1950s, the Jamaat-e-Islami set up networks of schools and cultural institutions to combat what it cast as, and I quote, an Indian onslaught on the cultural sphere. The Jamaat-e-Islami, you see, believed that a carefully planned Indian conspiracy was at work to destroy the Islamic identity of the Kashmiris through Hinduizing the school syllabus and spreading immorality and vice among the youth. Leaders of the Jamaat-e-Islami party even alleged that, I quote, the government of India had dispatched a team to Andalusia, headed by the Kashmiri Pandit politician D.P. Dhar, to investigate how Islam was driven out of Spain and to suggest measures as to how the Spanish experiment could be repeated in Kashmir too. This was nonsense, but the fact that it was nonsense didn't make it any less powerful or toxic. Following Andrabi's moral crusade, her mentor, the patriarch of Kashmir's Islamist movement, Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, launched the fateful mobilization that would explode into street violence in 2008. Each campaign pitted Kashmiri Islamic identity against Hindu India's modernity-suffused culture of vice. The targets range from migrant workers alleged to have raped a teenager to a teacher in Anantnag whose students were filmed dancing during a vacation. I caution my nation, Gilani warned, that if we don't wake up in time, India and its stooges will succeed and we will be displaced. Even though the ending of Kashmir's special constitutional status has seen the violence Gilani unleashed subside on the streets, the ugly social media commentary let loose by this dance in Anantnag shows the beliefs which underpinned it are far from spent. For many Kashmiris, India remains a threat. Their fears stoked by Hindu nationalists like the Uttar Pradesh lawmaker who infamously proclaimed that his supporters could now marry fair Kashmiri girls. The construction of a new Kashmir needs introspection on the region's values, but it also needs a new India willing to look past the wounds of history and build itself on foundations that aren't resting only on faith and religious identity. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor at ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.